All right, warning, what is happening in the market? Well, sorry for the delay. I've been out at the beaches here in Spain at Playa de los Muertos, one of the best beaches I've ever been to. Florida is not shit compared to that place, but this is NC Hammer Crypto. My name's Neil. Let's get into the technical analysis. So we saw Bitcoin drop. We saw that it hit near the 97,000 mark, which we had talked about in the previous videos. We had that major support, and we were testing this downward trend channel that we were following. So if this has a continuation, we could see that being a rejection and pushing back down till we get a little bit of support around here. But looking at the 200 EMA on the daily, it's still a little bit further away. Imagine it could take a little bit of time for this to start curving upwards. However, if we break this downward trend line, we're going to see a continuation potentially over 108,000. Keeping that in mind, also keep in mind DNT, BNT, and IOTX. BNT did break this upward trend line channel, but it is holding nicely over the 200 EMA support. We got that support as well at the 0.54 area. And when we're zooming out on BNT, you can see that it's got a lot of room to go. $1.59, I believe way higher than that, all the way up to $3. We are currently at 58 cents, but it is holding very nicely. We could see a rejection on this upward trend line, pushing it a little bit further down. The 618 is around 0.49 cents. Keeping that in mind, that's just below this. It would create a new lower low. We do want to hold support over that 0.54 roughly. BNT or DNT. DNT also broke its trend line. We had previously talked about it has a potential drop to 0.005 if it does not hold. However, we do want to see it hold above the 0.02 cents. DNT does also have a very long way to go, and it happens very quickly. You see that when it touched here back in February 6th, had that major push down really quick, shot back up, held above the 200 EMA, and had a major push up. When it broke this downward trend line, my prediction was right in this area before a little bit of a sell-off, and it just blew right past that. So now we are looking at another downward trend line. It's already touched once, twice, and we want to see it break this right here. And then once it pushes up over that EMA, 200 EMA, you can see a little bit of consolidation may happen, and then ultimate push upwards along with the rest of the market. IOTX. IOTX is testing a little bit below this black trend line. However, it is some major support if that does hold. And all we really have to do is get above that 200 EMA before we start seeing that pump. As we see back here in October, it pushed up over that 200 EMA, had a little bit more of a pump, consolidation, testing off the 200 EMA, pump, go towards the 200 EMA to keep it healthy, pump, back to the 200 EMA to keep it healthy, and then pump and pump again. So we can expect something similar to happen with IOTX if that support line does hold, forming a major W pattern. Pushing back to an all-time high would be all the way back up to around 0.49 cents. So moving on to QNT. Aaron's down quite a bit on QNT, but as I had previously stated in the previous videos, if we were selling here around 124, as it did not hold that black trend line, we saw it push down. It broke this upward trend line, which showed all sellers to keep pushing the price further downward. We tried seeing another little bit of support off of this wick off, and it pushed back up to the 0.51 or 512. 5. It's 5. And then it had that major rejection, breaking that trend line, pushing it down towards this downward trend line that we are now using as support. It also held above the 200 EMA, which is very nice to see, held above that downward trend line. To keep this healthy, we do want to see that push down and test and hold off that 200 EMA before ultimately going upwards. Being down a few grand, you really have to look at the bigger picture with QNT, not just QNT in specific, but a majority of the cryptocurrency market. Because we're around $100 right now. We expected it to potentially hit around the 90, even a possibility of going and testing this around 75, I believe I said. However, looking in the RSI, we are oversold. The purple is crossing back over yellow. That's good to see on the daily. But the all-time high on this is 428, at least on this chart. QNT has major potential to push up to over 1,000, potentially 1,500. So being down 7 grand, 8 grand, 10 grand, it would not be a good idea to sell because the furthest it can go is what, 64? So 50% loss if it goes down, but that's only if you sell it. I have strong faith that this black line is going to be holding and this black downward trend line is going to be holding. When we're looking at the Fibonacci retracement, move that there. The pushback up would be 0.618, being around $110. And with that, we could see it hold above this black trend line, which is kind of not the best support. And make that really thin because it's not substantial evidence for any kind of support. But with that being said, I would be holding your QNT and not selling it at that massive loss. I would be buying more if you have money to buy more, as it would be dollar cost averaging. It will be pushing back up. All it really has to do is beat this 126 area, and once it breaks that 126 area, you can see some kind of major push, like right here when we had, say it's already above the 200 EMA, say it's right here. It's a 125% increase. You may be currently down from, say you got in at the absolute peak, roughly 29%, but just to push upwards is going to push it up 125 or 129%. So buy more QNT while you can, because the people who bought in around the $77 mark aren't really worried about anything. It's just going to be pushing upwards from this downward trend line is my guess, depending on if Bitcoin ends up breaking above that downward trend line right here. If that breaks and holds, we could see that push up again over 108, but it may get rejected around the 110 area, showing a lower high than this previous high. Moving on to Compound. Compound had that major rejection all the way up here at $62. We got in around 46, got out around 60, and then it had that major pushback down below the 200 EMA. It is doing a little bit of consolidation. It is holding above this black trend line. This is the more important black trend line to be holding. And now that we broke that, we can get rid of this and that. And it is still in a downward, pretty sharp downward wedge like this. Once it breaks that, you could see that push up towards the 200 EMA. However, I think we are going to get a little bit of consolidation here, as this is where the first entry was. Grab some money, and then we'll start pushing upwards if Bitcoin starts pushing up. Looking at XRP. XRP still holding very nicely, holding above that 1.98 like we talked about. It could be testing this as support, which it did. It is at the 50 on the RSI. It is in June, some important days for XRP, so we will most likely see some consolidation within this area. Looking at XCN, XCN is looking pretty nice as well. There. Sorry, had to let someone in. XCN is doing that downward wedge. And that downward wedge is holding perfectly like we've been talking about for the past weeks. Testing this downward support, testing this as downward rejection, and it held nicely there, pushed over 200 EMA, held again, and then had a major push up towards this downward trend line. When and if soon we see this downward trend line get broken, XCN is going to rally once more. But keeping that in mind, we also want to hold support off this downward black trend line. It's getting very tight and coiled up in this area. All we really need is a break of one side or the other. If it breaks on the downside, I believe we're going to start getting some more support in this area around 0.009. if it breaks this downward top trend line, we could start seeing a major push. If we're looking at this, say with this fib, we're starting at the top here, fibbing down here. 618 is around the 0.02. Pretty nice profit from that small break. However, we could just be pushing all the way up to 0.028 and higher with just that break of this downward wedge. It's very nice to see that it's coiling up, grabbing a lot of money, getting consolidation. The longer it does in the consolidation, the bigger the boom is going to be in the long run. Moving over to XYO. XYO is holding pretty nicely, still in a downward channel. However, I believe we could see this do a little bit more of consolidation. We want to see it get close to this 200 EMA, which is actually the top downward trend line of this channel. So we could see a rapid pump like we did right here on the 21st. But with that push up, we just need to break that downward channel and this fair value gap of these two yellow lines to start pushing up towards this red dotted line and breaking right through that to a further high. And the last two I'm going to do are Toshi and Torn. Torn is looking very good more and more each day. It's very nice and consolidated. It pushed below that upward trend line, but held a little bit above the 200 EMA and then held back over that trend line. If this continues to hold, you'll start seeing this push upward until we break this $11 mark, and then it is off to the races for Tornado Cash. You can get Tornado Cash on MEXC. Reference links below. Appreciate it if you use them. But they have the lowest trading fee platform. Make sure you can use it within your country. But with that being said, there's Toshi. Toshi had a nice 25% pump, I believe. Okay, that's kind of strange. We'll just pull it up here. Toshi USD. Looking at Toshi, it had a nice push right here from this point up, which is around 26%. Not really the best known support, but people assume they all bought up right here, looking at what Bitcoin was doing. And the nice push up, but it's still underneath this trend line. We need to see that break before we really want to start to enter into Toshi if you want to do a meme coin. I always recommend Grass if you want free airdrop money. They're doing airdrops next month, I believe, and Coinbase for free coin airdrops, as well as Roller Coin for passive income playing stupid little games. That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoy. I will see you on the next one. Good luck and have fun with it.